Okay, in this video, we're going to have a look at macros. So in Excel, if there's a certain task or sequence of tasks that you perform quite often and you're doing it manually, what a macro allows you to do is to basically automate the process, to effectively do it automatically. So let's say, for example, we have a typical spreadsheet and we quite often have to insert a few rows at the top and insert the company name and the date. We may have to do it on this sheet, and then we may have to do it on another sheet. And if we find that that's an operation that we're doing manually quite often, we could create a macro for it. So you can create macros for a wide variety of things. This is just one particular simple example that we're going to use to demonstrate how macros work. Now, the first thing you need to do with the macros before you can create a macro is to make sure that your security settings are set up correctly. So under the File and Options at the bottom over there, you want to go into the Trust Center, click on Trust Center, click on Trust Center Settings, and then under the Macro Settings options over here, make sure that you have disabled VBA macros except digitally signed macros. Now you'll see that why macros come into the area of security is that it is possible that dangerous code can run in a macro, almost like a virus. So if you don't know what's in a particular macro, you shouldn't just run it. In this particular instance that we're going to show you, you're going to be creating the macro yourself, so there is no risk to running it. But if you get a macro from elsewhere, that's where just running any macro without knowing what's in it can be risky. All right, so make sure that option is ticked on. Now what we're going to do is we're going to say okay over there. Now to basically record a macro, if you go under View, you'll see there is this macros option, and the first step is to record a macro, right? So what we're going to basically do is we're going to click on this record macro, and once we're going to give it a name. So we're going to call this macro, let's say add headings. Now you can add a shortcut key. We'll look at doing that later. Right now we're going to leave that blank, and then it says store this macro where? In this workbook, right? Which means the current file that I'm in a new workbook. That's if you create a totally new one, or a personal macro workbook. Now, just the one point, typically you'll only use this workbook or in the personal macro workbook. If you use this workbook, it means that the macro, that automated operation will only be available in the current file. So if you open up some other file and you store the macro in this workbook, you won't be able to run it in another file. If you basically store the macro in your personal macro workbook, this is available in any file that you open. So later on, if you open up different files, any macros that you store here in the personal macro workbook will be available. So for this particular example, I'm just going to store it in this workbook, and I'm going to say okay. Now, you have to give it okay, so here's a very important point. When I gave this thing a name, right, you have to start the name with a letter or underscore, and there mustn't be any spaces. So because I've had a space in the macro name, that's why it's not actually accepting the name. And the third thing, it mustn't conflict with an existing name in the workbook. So I'm going to say okay, and all I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove that space, and I'm going to put in an underscore instead of the space, and I'm going to say okay. So that accepted it. Okay, so now we're at the point where it's recording whatever actions we take, right? So let's assume that our first action is to select the first 3 rows, right click and insert. So that inserts 3 blank rows. And let's say in the very top row, we now type in the widget company, assuming that's the name of our company. Let's also make that bold. So we go in there, we make that bold. Let's increase the size, let's say to 24. Let's put an underline on it. And below it, let's basically say equals today and open and close brackets. So it's a formula with the current date. All right, so let's assume that's our macro. We're now done recording the macro. So what we do is we go back to the view menu, we click on this drop down, and you can see we now have to tell it to stop recording. Because the moment we started recording, it was recording. So this option only appears while your macro is being recorded, right? So now we say stop recording and we're done. So the macro is now available for us to run. So let's look at how we would run that macro. Let's say we're in another sheet and it had some data over here, and we wanted to do the same thing that we did manually, insert the 3 rows, put in the heading and so forth. So what we would do is we would go into, while we're in the sheet, go into the macros, click view macros, and you can see there is our macro called add headings, right? And all we need to do is basically click on run. And immediately it does exactly that. It inserted 3 rows at the top, and basically put in exactly the same information. So you can imagine that if we had hundreds of sheets or 20-30 sheets and we wanted to do this particular operation on each one, a macro would obviously be much more quicker in terms of running a macro versus having to manually do it. This is a very simple example as well. You can obviously do much more complex things with a macro. The one thing that it does seem a bit long is that you have to click on this option, go view macros, and then select the run. So what you can actually do with macros is here on the top, if I click on this little drop down, you can customize the quick access toolbar. All these icons on the top are basically called the quick access icons. So you can actually add a macro icon over here. So let's look at how we can basically do that. So after clicking on this drop down, we go here to the bottom and we select more commands, and we then basically go and find the option under this drop down. It says choose commands from where. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on that drop down and we're going to select macros, and here is our macro called add headings. So we click on that macro, we say add it, so it's now adding it to the quick access toolbar. So it'll appear here on the top next to these other options. So you can see auto save, save, undo, and redo are already there. So there they are, auto save, undo, redo. And what we can also do is we can click on this modify. So this thing will have that icon over there, but if we wanted a different icon, we can click on modify and we can select any other icon. So let's just say, for example, we wanted to select, let's just choose an icon. Let's say the shield for argument's sake, and we click on OK. So that's the icon we're going to use, and we say OK, right? So you can see there's the icon, that shield. Now, if we were in another sheet, right, and we wanted to add the headings, okay, this one is blank. If we just click on this icon now, immediately it actually executes that particular macro. So you can see using the quick access just makes it much more quicker to run the macro.